Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Welcome to all of our members, subscribers, and viewers from all across the world. In the past couple of days, there have been very conflicting reports and much of a confusion is happening, a lot of confusion, because some reports are saying that the Palestinian side accepted a ceasefire agreement. Then we have other contradicting statements coming from, reportedly, Steve Witkoff. Tonight, we're going to talk all about the details, all about the talks that there is a ceasefire, and the interesting bit behind it, primarily the fact that it has been reached in agreement between Hamas and the United States. So between the Palestinian delegation and the United States administration, without the involvement of Israel. There were, however, certain statements being made and certain reports before the declaration of Hamas today that they accepted an updated version of the Witkoff proposal that might indicate that things are moving towards the right direction in terms of a ceasefire agreement. All of these reports are linked to what's happening internally in Israel, internally with Benjamin Netanyahu, and the threats, the immediate threats for certain members of his government to leave. There are a lot of developments happening, and all of them are connected together. The tensions between him and the United States administration, tensions between European countries, certain actions that are planned to happen in the next few weeks, and the fact that Donald Trump does want to reach a ceasefire. It appears that Donald Trump does want an agreement happening as soon as possible. Now, today, and this was just recent, reports everywhere, Hamas accepted a ceasefire based on an updated version of the deal that has been put together by Steve Witkoff and the Americans. When did it come? Well, before that, there were a couple of interesting reports and statements. One of them is this one here. Donald Trump was expected to announce a Gaza ceasefire. The ceasefire would be declared only as part of a deal to secure the release of Israeli hostages, according to the report. The announcement comes after Trump stated that good news could soon emerge regarding Iran on the nuclear talks. He also said that we will be hearing good news about Gaza in the next few days, according to other reports too, in the past couple of weeks, stating that, or proving that, the American administration is interested in reaching a ceasefire. They want this to end, and Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't yet. So from the American perspective, they've had talks, and for the first time, this declaration is going to come from a United States president. Is it a way from the American administration to push Israel to the corner and force them into a ceasefire? Perhaps. However, Joe Biden, when he was there back in July or even May 2024, he already said at the time that the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, agreed to a ceasefire deal. And then later on, Benjamin Netanyahu fled from the ceasefire agreement. He then said, no, I did not accept the ceasefire deal. That's not the case. There were UN Security Council resolutions. The United States was calling for a ceasefire. There were reports of pressure, but clearly that didn't work. Are there any hints or any signs that this is going to work now? Perhaps. They are related to what's happening inside of Israel. And we're going to reach what's happening in Israel shortly. That's especially in the relation to the threats to leave the government, especially coming from members in the Haredi community in the Israeli government. Now, another thing that happened today was this report here from Al-Mayadeen that said a Palestinian leader reveals to Al-Mayadeen a ceasefire deal for Gaza, saying that the Palestinian American mediator Bishara Bahbah, who is acting on behalf of the American administration, Steve Witkoff, he actually reached a really good proposal with the Palestinian movement Hamas. saying that we're talking about potentially somewhere between 60 to a 90-day ceasefire. 10 living Israeli prisoners of war will be released in 2 batches, 5 on the first day and 5 on the last day of the ceasefire, some dead bodies too. Immediately, 1,000 trucks a day of aid going into the Gaza Strip, a formula with a timetable to continue the talks about a permanent ceasefire moving forward, with certain guarantees coming from the United States administration that they will force somehow Israel to go into these talks to reach a permanent ceasefire in Gaza after this temporary, again, ceasefire begins. Now, these reports are talking about a new proposal from Steve Witkoff. This isn't the older proposal from Steve Witkoff that Israel claimed it accepted, that had ridiculous proposals for the Palestinian side, where Israel would completely dismantle everything inside of the Gaza Strip, disarm all of the Palestinian resistance, and with all of that, get all of the prisoners of war back immediately, and with all of that, not even commit that the war will end. This is what Benjamin Netanyahu wanted. And these were conditions, by the way, that were added by Benjamin Netanyahu in the past couple of months too. For example, disarming the Palestinian resistance, that wasn't a condition from Israel in the early days, or even just 3-4 months ago. There was no talk about we need to disarm them. Only thing they said that Hamas can't rule Gaza. And from Hamas' perspective, they said, no problem, we're not actually interested in ruling Gaza, although they were democratically elected, but if that's going to be a problem in reaching a ceasefire, no problem, have a technocratic government that is consisting of Palestinian figures who are knowing exactly what they're doing, agreed upon by all Palestinian political and resistance movements too, and by the Palestinian people to manage the day-to-day. However, anything in relation to the Palestinian resistance or to the arms of the Palestinian resistance or the relations of the Palestinian resistance, all of these things are non-negotiable because they are tied with the existence of an occupation, an occupying entity. And that's the thing that the Palestinians have been saying for a very long time. So far, what we can get here before we get to the acceptance of Hamas today of the ceasefire, and then move on to the reports that were leaked by, funny enough, Axios, and we'll get to Axios in a second, that no, actually Steve Witkoff said they did not accept the ceasefire and they need to do more. We have so far 2 signs that things were moving forward. Firstly, this declaration from Trump that he was prepared to announce a ceasefire that's going to happen in Gaza. Then a Palestinian leading figure from the Palestinian side, from the Palestinian negotiating side, speaking to Al-Mayadeen, telling them that there is a prospect of a ceasefire. There are positive movements forward. Then there were also movements coming from Israel. What were these movements? These movements were Israel sent a delegation just after they withdrew their delegation from Qatar several days back, and Benjamin Netanyahu told them, that's it, there is no hope. Benjamin Netanyahu was saying that there is no chance that we're going to go ahead with the ceasefire, we're too far apart. All of a sudden today, Benjamin Netanyahu sends his delegation to Cairo. So assuming that the Israeli side, they weren't actually interested in a ceasefire or weren't being pushed to a ceasefire by the American administration with some pressure happening, and there are clear indications of a pressure happening. Now, mind you, not pressure to stop a genocide, pressure to reach a ceasefire. There's a difference between the two. The United States administration and everyone who supported Israel from the beginning to this day and did not take the adequate and relevant action to stop them has contributed to the genocide in one way or another. However, we're talking about a ceasefire. People need to differentiate between the two. He sent a delegation to Cairo. If he sent a delegation to Cairo, that means he's under pressure to get a deal. Is it another act? Could be another act. But at the end of the day, it's coming simultaneously with the declaration from Trump that he will be announcing, he wants to announce ceasefire, which is, by the way, a demand from the Palestinian delegation. Then a Palestinian significant figure from the negotiating delegation in Cairo saying there's significant good progress. And this progress is happening with the introduction of the Palestinian American, Bishara Bahbah, working on behalf of Witkoff, reaching a mutual agreement with Hamas, or a proposal that can be agreed upon by all parties to move ahead with, to at least get the ball rolling with having a ceasefire, getting the aid in, getting the humanitarian relief, and then moving ahead to a ceasefire, a full-blown ceasefire, and then having talks with the American side about certain guarantees. Now, from an Israeli perspective, not only did they send their delegation to Cairo, there are multiple reports in several media outlets in Israel talking about the fact that there might be some sort of acceptance of Hamas not disarming now, but maybe in the future. Things like that. Small bits and details. And at the end of the day, in relation to the ceasefire and the negotiations and the talks, it's all about the details. Israel and the Palestinian side, they are working. There are certain agreements, certain understandings that both parties are fine with. However, it's the small details. And every time there was a movement towards the direction of reaching a deal, of having a ceasefire, Benjamin Netanyahu would come up with a new addition, a new demand that would hinder the prospect of reaching a ceasefire. What's happening with that too in the United States in relation to Israel? In the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about the American administration removing certain figures who are considered to be pro-Israeli, such as Mark Waltz, and the Zionist lobby inside of the Trump administration slowly losing power. Today and yesterday, there were more interesting movements in that direction. With this report here about the U.S. National Security Council staff fired en masse, including Mideast, Israel, and Iran chiefs. So the Trump administration is not only sacking Waltz, other figures too. Now he's sacking people in the National Security Council directly linked with Israel. And these people have been appointed by Mike Waltz himself. According to this report, one of them is the influential far-right activist Laura Loomer, who, according to this report, spreads 9/11 conspiracy theories and promotes QAnon. Now, is this another sign that Trump is removing people who are closely aligned with Israel? Of course it is, clearly. Now, it's not new for Donald Trump to have shifts and shuffling in his administration. That has been very, very evident from his first term. Between 2016 and 2020, Donald Trump changed so many people in his administration that were considered to be core allies of Donald Trump at the time. So when you look at them, you think this is an unbreakable alliance. These people are together all the time. No, at the end of the day, Donald Trump sacked them and he moved on because the man is primarily concerned with himself and getting the things that he wants done. We have this alongside lack of interest and lack of will at top levels inside of Israel, including in the Israeli army, to continue with the war. Benjamin Netanyahu just suggested that he wants to appoint a new person as the head of the Shin Bet, who confirmed to him that I'm going to continue all out with you and not end the war at any cost. I'm just going to continue with you. But that put him at odds with the Israeli IDF chief of staff, who said the priority is to release the prisoners of war. If we go to Gaza, if we have a massive operation in Gaza, we will face a horror scenario, as it was described in the Israeli media, with many losses, which we will get to, by the way, later on. Then, now, he's saying as well, this is not an endless war. We will act briefly. So you have a head of an army in the country saying outright that this is not an endless war. Therefore, saying that, well, basically, we need to reach a ceasefire. We can't continue on an all-out war forever, which is what Benjamin Netanyahu wants to portray, that they're going towards an all-out war. and this isn't going to end ever. That's not the case. The people in Israel are resisting him. The IDF chief of staff is resisting him, and the people inside of Israel are resisting him. The American administration as well, are opposing what he says to. Now, let's go back slightly to Hamas accepting the Witkoff proposal and what has been said about that. So in Israel, they're saying that Hamas claimed to agree to the Witkoff outline, and Israel insists it's a spin. Hamas officials claimed on Monday afternoon that they had agreed to the mediator's proposal, which they called the Witkoff outline. However, the US President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff claims that he is disappointed by the organization's response, and Israel emphasizes that this is just another spin by Hamas. Where did the statements come from? When did they start? They started and they were spread like wildfire throughout multiple media outlets in the Arab world and in Western media too. However, who said that Steve Witkoff denied that? It was Axios and Barak Ravid, the Zionists. All of a sudden said that Witkoff said on Monday, although there was no official direct confirmation from Witkoff. He could have said it. It hasn't been confirmed yet. It's causing a lot of confusion at the moment. Did he say it? Did he not say it? They didn't specify a time. They didn't spy exactly how. Did he say it exactly? The sources told, and he told Axios. Okay, well, he could have said that before. Is he referring to the same statement? Is he referring to that same agreement that has been reached by his own representative in Cairo with the Palestinian side, and the Palestinian side accepted a ceasefire? And if not, and if he wasn't aware of it, then Steve Witkoff clearly isn't that involved or that engaged in what's happening with the ceasefire talks. And that's, well, not very likely. I mean, people can make mistakes, but that isn't very likely because Steve Witkoff was, at the end of the day, the man who told Benjamin Netanyahu that the hell that Trump was asking or calling for, saying that it will come in the Middle East, includes Israel. And then Benjamin Netanyahu is pushed into phase one of the ceasefire, only for Israel to go and break the ceasefire again, like they have with the initial temporary ceasefire that took place just a couple of months after the 7th of October. Now, what is Benjamin Netanyahu saying with all of this, and what are his statements? Is he looking towards a ceasefire, or is he not looking for a ceasefire? What's happening exactly with Benjamin Netanyahu? Well, Benjamin Netanyahu made a very interesting statement today. And he said that if we don't reach a ceasefire today, we will reach a ceasefire tomorrow. Now, there was a lot of talk after Benjamin Netanyahu made that statement. Several people in Israel, especially with the families of the prisoners of war, were very happy. But then they had a different clarification from his office. So this was the report coming from Israel. PM hopes for good news tomorrow. He said, if there won't be good news today, there will be good news tomorrow, he said. And we're working to get a deal. Now, from the tone of Benjamin Netanyahu and from his statement, it appeared to be that he's actually saying, I really hope that we're going to, if we're not going to get good news today, we're going to get good news tomorrow, alongside all of the other reports that Hamas accepted a ceasefire deal, with the previous statements from Trump that hopefully will announce a ceasefire agreement towards the weekend. But then his office said that he didn't mean it concretely. He actually made a statement that is more broad, as in, if we won't reach an agreement today, we'll reach it tomorrow. You know how we always say, if it wouldn't happen today, it's going to happen tomorrow. Now, this led to a lot of disappointment amongst Israel, especially the families of the prisoners of war. And then they started to say that, this Gideon's chariots situation is probably going to lead us to, well, another Hannibal directive, and we don't want another Hannibal directive. Don't make this another Hannibal directive. How is that sitting with Benjamin Netanyahu's talks internally with the people who are threatening to resign. There are people who in the Israeli government threatening to resign, and now it's actually escalating even further with one of the senior ministers inside of the Benjamin Netanyahu government making very dangerous statements against the Likud party led by Benjamin Netanyahu. He's the labor minister, Yoav Ben Tzur. Said that the proposed conscription law and the Likud MKs who, according to him, want to erase the Haredi public from the public sphere. He said studying Torah will not be considered a criminal offense in the Jewish state. So we have an outright attack from a minister in the Netanyahu government against the leading party, the party that is led by Benjamin Netanyahu, the Likud party, saying that these people want to erase the Haredi community from all of the Israeli public. They want us out. Then there are serious talks about people resigning from the Israeli government. With this report here in Ma'arif saying that it seems that relations between Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Haredi parties have recently hit a snag from which it will be difficult to recover. They're saying what the rabbis really think of Netanyahu and what will lead to the dissolution of the coalition, stating more criticism coming from the rabbis in Israel against Benjamin Netanyahu and against all of these attempts by the Netanyahu government to force conscription and to punish people who will not actually follow the rules of the government and the orders of the Israeli government. And it didn't just end there. There are now outright considerations to collapse the government of Israel, with this recent statement from the leader of the Lithuanian current or like line, considering withdrawing from the coalition due to the delay in the exemption from the conscription. Rabbi Moshe Hillel Hirsch spoke with the son of Rabbi of Gur, Nehemiah Alter, and said that the responsibility of the Degel Torah party withdrawing from the coalition due to the failure to advance the conscription law is being considered. Rabbi Hirsch said that before making a decision on the matter, he will speak with the other Haredi leaders and MKs from the party. So there are concrete moves coming from leading figures in the coalition of Israel saying that we are going to resign. Why? Because they know what they're expecting. So they're reaching a boiling point, an end of the road scenario, because Benjamin Netanyahu isn't at a level where he can continue and drag this more and more and have these new sort of deals. He's asking for people to go and die for him in Gaza in this genocide, but he is refusing to force, almost half of the population to go and fight. So therefore, it's increasing the argument. It's strengthening the argument that's coming against him from the population, primarily the secular population, telling him that why are we having all of this burden? Why are we paying the price for all of this genocide and your war when you don't want to send the people from the Haredi community? This is this is causing a lot of trouble inside of Israel. Then there is outright criticism now coming from the Israeli president with no way to explain it apart from a direct criticism against Benjamin Netanyahu. Usually the Israeli president, he will try and be as diplomatic as possible, as moderate as possible with the statements that he makes, especially with a very tense situation politically, such as it is now or has been for several years now. So Herzog said, let no one think of disobeying court rulings. I warn and forbid no one should be thinking of disobeying neither the rulings of the courts nor the provisions of the law. In the Jewish and democratic state of Israel, the rule of law is not a recommendation, but an essential existential rule. Anyone who even discusses the possibility of violating the law and the rulings of the court harms Israeli statehood and sovereignty. So in fact, you have the Israeli president saying now that the prime minister is harming the statehood of Israel and its sovereignty and its democracy, and it's also its Jewishness. Outright criticism. He is causing this friction with a man who is supposed to be a person who's really in between even the public anger and the prime minister, but he's even breaking that. Now, moving on to Gaza. Israel is, of course, excelling at its genocide and barbarism, next level stuff inside of the Gaza Strip, claims that they're controlling 77%. The Palestinian authorities inside of the Gaza Strip say that Israel is present and is occupying by force and by at gunpoint expelling people from about 77% of the Gaza Strip. What does that actually mean on the ground? And does this mean this is a defeat for the Palestinian side with this progression of the Israeli genocide forces inside of the Gaza Strip? Not at all. Why? Because the people of Gaza are still in Gaza. We don't have mass exodus. We don't have people fleeing in their hundreds of thousands. They are still inside of the Gaza Strip. Now, of course, the genocide state and the terror army of Israel would displace people. Many people have been displaced over a dozen times or even more than that in Gaza, being killed everywhere they go. That doesn't mean that Israel has control over the Gaza Strip. That means Israel is present inside of the Gaza Strip in certain parts of Gaza. Does that affect the resistance? Does that affect the long-term presence of the Palestinians? Well, of course, there is risk of the presence of the Palestinians, especially if, for example, other countries collaborate with Israel to expel the population and the ethnic cleansing campaign gets implemented. However, we're seeing a shift from the main backer of this whole plan, which is Donald Trump, who's no longer talking about this mass exodus and ethnic cleansing that he used to talk about previously. Egypt is still not playing ball with Israel in relation to the ethnic cleansing. They haven't played ball since October 2023, despite international pressure. Israel's main allies in the United States and Europe were pushing and applying pressure on Egypt to take the population. That was the main exit, and Egypt was blocking that exit. Now Israel controls the Rafah border. Israel controls the Philadelphia corridor, yet despite that, they're not opening the Philadelphia corridor. They're not opening the borders with Egypt for the people to flee. Why? Because they know there's going to be repercussion, and they know that there is quite a hostile side on the Egyptian side. And we're going to get to that in a bit. That's not going to happen unless you're going to bring like massive boats from the sea, and then people would willingly start to leave Gaza. Although the statements from the people is that despite all of this destruction, all of this genocide in Gaza, they are not planning to leave actually. And they are willing to die in their land and not leave again. Why? Because 73% of them before the 7th of October already are refugees from Haifa, from Jaffa, from Led, Asqalan, and Sdoud, and other parts of occupied Palestine or modern-day Israel, what is called modern-day Israel. And they know very well that when they leave, they're not allowed to go back. Therefore, from their perspective, let me die here, and the only place I'm going to leave for is heaven. This is what the people of Gaza are saying. And the resistance isn't stopping whatsoever. Today, there was another report coming from Al-Qassam brigades that they target Israeli tanks and soldiers in the Beit Lahia operations. According to the reports that are coming from the Al-Qassam brigades, the body parts of the Israeli terror forces were spreading everywhere after these operations happened. Beit Lahia is in the north, very significant because the north of Gaza is supposed to be a place that Israel said it was done with from a very, very, very long time ago, before they invaded Rafah. The fact that they're facing such fierce resistance in North Gaza shows you that these people have no active control over the ground. They're there, but the resistance is there, and the population is there. And of course, the civilian population will pay the price and are paying the price. But in the grand scheme of things, there are still operations coming from the Palestinian resistance 18 months into a full-blown genocide, with over 100,000 tons of TNT landing on Gaza, over 5 times the equivalent of the nuclear bombs that landed in Japan. So you're not talking about anything that's ending in relation to the Palestinian resistance. Of course, Israel would want to try to portray it as if, we are annihilating them, we're finishing them off, we're this, we're that. But the fact of the matter is, they told their allies in Western establishments in the beginning, give us a few months, we'll be done with them. That's why there was a temporary ceasefire at the time, because Israel didn't get rid of them after all of that barbaric bombardment in the first few months, where they were killing 1,000 people a day almost in Gaza. Constantly, consistently. Didn't happen. Then the tide started to slightly turn. Israel went into a temporary ceasefire. It broke it, of course. Continuation, other types of deals, till we reached another ceasefire. Israel broke it again, and now we're at the same position. Is Israel, with its control, solid in Gaza? Is Israel coherent? Is Israel harmonious with its own genocide forces inside of the Gaza Strip? Oh no, not at all. Not at all. They're actually fighting each other and almost killing each other. Look at this here. With a weapon and a kettle, a Nahal fighter was seriously injured in a fight in Gaza. The MPCI is investigating. Unusual incident. A fighter in Battalion 931 was seriously injured after another fighter hit him in the head with a weapon and a kettle. Who's the other fighter? Another IDF fighter, but they're trying to use like a language that is not very clear. Internal fighting. The military police has opened an investigation, and the findings will be forwarded to the military prosecutor's office. These people are battering each other. The IDF genocide soldiers hitting each other, killing each other, fighting with each other. If these are not signs of like internal civil war or a failed state, a failed army, a failed campaign, a failed everything, what is then? People are fighting in between them, supposedly with the war of revival and with Gideon's chariots or Netanyahu's wheelchair or whatever it is, and talking about all of this occupation of the Gaza Strip, and we're going to wipe Hamas in a couple of weeks or a few months. All of that is garbage propaganda. The Palestinian resistance will never be defeated so long as there's a reason for it to exist. And that reason has existed since 1948, with a terrorist movement called the Zionist movement, taking the land by force, expelling the population, not allowing them to go back, and not treating anyone as equal in the land, and continuing its supremacist and racist policies. In 2025, we're not in the 80s or the 90s even, 2025, a regime of national and religious supremacy. This is what's happening between them. These people are fighting each other, almost killing each other. And I'm pretty sure that this is just the tip of the iceberg in relation to the Israeli terror forces inside of the Gaza Strip. Now, moving on to the aid. There were lots of talks about this new Gaza humanitarian foundation going into the Gaza Strip and allowing aid in line with Israeli demands and in line with all of this talk. But now there's a very big problem. And that problem is, just several weeks into this movement forming, this man resigns. Jake Wood resigns. Why did he resign? What exactly happened? Well, he said some really interesting statements. He said that it's not really going to be in line with several things, and I refuse to take part of that. This was the report, and there were multiple other reports too about his resignation. He specifically said the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence will not be met with this new organization, with this new foundation. And this is something that I will not abandon, according to him. ex-veteran, and he is in a movement called Rubicon. Apparently, these people help like people in war-torn areas and allow humanitarian aid. And now he is withdrawing, proving what? Proving the controversies that we spoke about when the report started to come out about this organization, their ties with Goldman Sachs and the financial sector inside of the United States, and all sorts of shady involvement, and of course the influence that's coming from Israel in this humanitarian aid. They want to politicize humanitarian aid. Now, of course, Israel doesn't want to allow any aid in, by the way. Israel wants to starve the people to death. But even their allies who support a genocide and facilitate a genocide, even though they act like they don't, it's like the level of barbarism of this country is even intolerable for them. Therefore, they were like, look, we have to sort something out. Let's come out with a nice humanitarian group. Ex-armed forces, you're happy with them, we're happy with them. What can happen, right? Don't worry. But even this group is now telling you, well, the head of this group, Jake Wood, is saying, no, we're not going to be impartial, we're not going to be neutral, not humane, nor independent. We're not going to be reaching all of that. And I cannot abandon these principles, according to him. That's another blow. This is another blow for the attempt to use the starvation as a tool through the humanitarian aid. And if the United States, and it could be a move from the United States, by the way, who knows? Why? Because the movement is US based. Well, the company is founded in Switzerland so that it can be attractive for donors from all sorts of the world, and so that they can try and hide the American administration's influence on them, seeing as the United States administration has been the facilitator and supporter and backer of all of this genocide, the legitimizer of Israel, diplomatically, politically, with armaments, with money, whatever they need, even protecting them from international law. So that could be a move coming from the United States telling Israel that even that we're going to have to get the aid in the normal ways. And even if we want to talk about the United Nations and UNRWA, for example, they're going to have to continue to operate. In effect, what? Continuing the same thing that happened before, which Israel used to claim was an act of allowing aid to, you guessed it, Hamas, again, to Gaza. Now, at the moment, the very, very limited amount of aid that's going in is wreaking havoc. Why? Because Israel is allowing this aid to go in the night. A couple of bits and bobs of flour and stuff, like not adequate whatsoever for the need of the population. That's why the talks about the aid going in, if a ceasefire is reached, are 1,000 trucks a day, which is double what the normal average daily truck demand going into the Gaza Strip, 1,000 a day for a period of at least 60, 70 days. And that's just the initial phase. Of course, if there's an all-out ceasefire afterwards, or a complete cessation of hostilities, the end of the genocide, and that's it, then you're going to have to talk about much, much bigger quantities going inside of the Gaza Strip. That's in relation to the ceasefire and the talks. So there is still lack of clarity. There are still bits of information that are not really understood. But what we do know is that there has been progress. There have been reports of progress coming from the United States, coming from the Palestinian side. However, Zionist elements are denying that and trying to show it as if it's not really working, despite even the statement of Netanyahu that we could be reaching or bearing good news today or tomorrow, and then later, of course, denying it. Of course, it's complicated, but this is what's happening on that front. And at the end of the day, nothing is clear up until we see an implementation, an outright declaration coming clearly from the officials of all parties involved, and this being implemented on the ground. Apart from that, it's still all in the realm of talks and negotiations. Now, the final thing that I wanted to talk to you about is the Egyptian front. Now, Israel and Egypt, they have been in deteriorating relations. The relations have been deteriorating since the 7th of October, and that deterioration has been rapid. As a matter of fact, this deterioration in relations wasn't only with the Israeli side, but also with the American side too. It was highlighted when the Egyptian president refused to go and meet with the American president after he was invited to go and meet the American president. Guess what? The Egyptian president still hasn't met the American president, but he went to other countries too. So it's not like a problem of traveling. He went to Russia to celebrate their victory in Europe Day, the Russian one. And he also met with other leaders too. And he went to Spain, another country that is very vocal against the genocide in Gaza and against Israel too. But he hasn't met with the American president yet, clearly because the American president didn't have an outright change of the whole plan, following his statements that he wants to ethnically cleanse the population, and that Egypt and Jordan will have to have some sort of weight, taking that weight and taking the numbers of population. But this article that I wanted to share with you now is actually written by the resigned or retired Major General Itzhak Brik, who I quoted many times previously since the beginning of this genocide, criticizing Netanyahu very heavily, talking about the need to reach a deal very, very early on, speaking with the genocide soldiers on a day-to-day basis, no matter where they are, because of his position, and actually having talks with Benjamin Netanyahu himself, trying to talk him out of this continued genocide campaign in Gaza, and saying how Israel is reaching towards destruction. Now he's seeing things with the eyes of a person who was in the security establishment in Israel and constantly focused on the security element in Israel, and he isn't really bringing good news to the table. So this was his article here in one of the Israeli newspapers, saying that Egypt is cooking up the next disaster for Israel, and it could end very, very badly. The article began here with Egypt not only does it not respect the peace agreement with Israel, but also creates working relationships with our greatest enemies. Israel to this day does not address the grim reality developing against us and turns a blind eye. And he's saying that because, according to him, Israel hasn't been focusing on what's happening in Egypt because it's in denial. Israel is in denial, according to him. They're engaged in this pointless war, pointless genocide in Gaza that it's not going to win, and forgetting the bigger picture. He said, since the outbreak of the Iron Swords War, we have witnessed a worrying deterioration in relations between Israel and Egypt. This situation has reached the point where Egypt has decided not to send an ambassador to Israel. And as a result, Israel will not send an ambassador to Egypt either. In effect, Egypt is abandoning the peace agreement with Israel without openly declaring it, and it is turning its back on us. Moreover, he continued, Egypt not only does not honor the peace agreement with Israel, but it also creates working relationships, including the purchase of weapons and joint military exercises with the countries considered Israel's greatest enemies. Today, Egypt has the largest and most powerful army in the Middle East, and Israel has no answer to this should Egypt decide to go on a war with Israel. Over the past 20 years, the IDF has got 6 combat divisions, thousands of tanks, 50% of the artillery companies, infantry and infantry brigades, engineering battalions, and intelligence gathering units, and thousands of regular personnel. In addition, shortening compulsory military service for men has significantly reduced the number of regular combatants, and this is only a partial list of the cuts that have been made. The size of the IDF's ground army today is a third of the size of the army we had 20 years ago. Brick continued, as a result, the IDF currently does not have sufficient forces to deploy on the Egyptian border, both in routine and in times of war. The IDF is incapable of defending against an Egyptian attack, and it is certainly incapable of attacking the Egyptian army. This is very important. Incapable of attacking the Egyptian army. This is the first time that we have a retired Major General in Israel saying that we are incapable of attacking them. But he adds more interesting points in his article. He said, we continue to live on borrowed time and on miracles, which unfortunately do not always materialize. In order to understand the magnitude of the problem we face, it is important to understand some details about the Egyptian army and how Israel to this day does not address the grim reality developing against us and turns a blind eye. There's been a significant increase in manpower and weapons. The Egyptian regular army has grown by 30% in recent years. They're expanding their military infrastructure, building infrastructure for storing tanks, artillery, engineering, mechanical equipment, and more. This infrastructure has grown in recent years from 300,000 square meters to 2.5 million square meters, which indicates the expansion of the Egyptian army at a dizzying pace. Preparations for unconventional weapons, he said. Videos released by the Egyptians indicate that they are prepared for chemical and biological weapons to attack Israel with, in a relatively new factor that can be seen from satellite imagery, biological and chemical weapons prepared to attack Israel with. The IDF prepares itself for war based on analysis of the enemy's intentions, not the enemy's potential, in another criticism for the Israeli army. Violations, they're violating the peace agreement in Sinai, he's continuing. The peace agreement with the Egyptians agreed that Egypt is allowed to maintain a mechanized division in Sinai, plus an additional tank brigade for a total of 47 battalions of all types and 300 tanks. Throughout the years since the agreement was signed, the Egyptians have been violating the peace agreement. Today, they maintain about 180 battalions of all types in Sinai, 4 times what was agreed upon the peace agreement, meaning 4 divisions within Sinai. The deployment of forces is in a violation of the agreement, he continued. The peace agreement with Egypt stipulated that the only mechanized division permitted to be maintained within Sinai would be able to deploy its forces up to 60 kilometers from the Suez Canal. Contrary to the agreement, today we have the Egyptians maintaining 4 divisions within Sinai with large forces located deep within Sinai beyond 60 kilometers, such as Al Arish and even near the border with Rafah. Definite preparations for war, he added, and that was one of the most important bits in his article. They're definitely preparing for war. The Egyptians are certainly preparing for war with Israel, he said. This is also reflected in the paving of highways and construction of bunkers and ammunition, fuel and food to store all of that, helicopter landing pads and more inside of Sinai. According to him, we also have poor intelligence coverage and errors in perception. Intelligence coverage on the Sinai west of the Suez Canal, intelligence coverage on the Sinai is provided by 12 civilian IDF employees who have not received any training. They are headed by a lieutenant colonel in the permanent ranks. All of the intelligence personnel, who number hundreds, are engaged in other sectors, including the best of them, and hardly pay attention to what's happening in Sinai and the west of the Suez Canal. There is no complete intelligence coverage of what is happening in Egypt from the canal line in west. Therefore, there is no monitoring by the IDF intelligence strengthening of the Egyptian army in all areas, both in terms of weapons of all types and in terms of new infrastructure, including factories used by the Egyptian army. The IDF is in the fog of battle regarding everything that is happening in Egypt. And he ended with, they are a non-deterrent threat. He ended with a statement saying a non-deterrent threat. The statement that many in Israel and the army use, that there is nothing to fear, that the Egyptian army will launch an attack. He's criticizing Israel for that. Because decision makers in Egypt know full well that the state of Israel can destroy the Aswan Dam on the Nile, and then the Nile basin will flood and tens of millions of Egyptians will lose their lives, in a statement that has no solid basis. He said this statement has no solid basis, and I will not elaborate according to him. It only can be said this threat to the Egyptians will not deter them or prevent them from starting a war with Israel. This is a very interesting article coming from Itzhak Briki, a man who was a major general in the Israeli army, who is very, very updated with every development that Israel does on the ground. In the current genocide in Gaza, the whole campaign, he's been criticizing Netanyahu from the beginning. And he also previously criticized Netanyahu for exhausting the Israeli military, leading the Israeli military to such a vulnerable position. They're exhausting all of these resources against the innocent people in Gaza, and they are forgetting about the bigger threat. They're talking about Iran or talking about certain threats coming from Israel. They are nowhere near that. And this man is admitting that the Egyptian army is the strongest army in the Middle East. And these were the main things that I wanted to share with you in this live stream tonight. As usual, thank you so much for tuning in for another show. In the meantime, stay blessed, take care, and I will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone.